lot of Republican, lot of Republican priorities completed. What's your general overview of the session?
It was a good session. I think we did accomplish a lot. We didn't finish on such a great note. They had, of course, a meltdown up in the Senate once again on the last day, like we did, previously. But we did achieve a lot. We got the blue bill for the governor, got that passed through. We were really hoping to at least get the scholarships for the families of police officers through as well. We had passed it in the House, plenty of time, but for whatever reason, it was on the last day and did not materialize. I had a couple of bills that were up there pending. One that had been up there for a long time. It gave another tool in the toolbox for a judge to add for sex offenders dealing with children as a condition of the release. It would add may, not shall, but polygraph to the terms of the release. Other states that have done this, and it's about 25 or 26, have had a dramatic drop in recidivism. So I thought that was a very important bill to get through. But we will. I'm gonna pre-file that one here in just a few days, and hopefully we'll get it through next year. Also, I had a bill that once again sat in the Senate. They didn't pass it last year. We were, told it would pass this year. It did not. I think it would have passed had we not had the filibuster that we had. And that bill, dealt with the expansion of the existing legislation that prohibited instruction and discussion of gender ideology and sexual orientation in the classroom, as well as things like pride flags. There has been an indoctrination attempt by some schools, and there absolutely, from some, is they intentionally sexualization of children. We're trying to focus on academics and let them be children and innocent as long as possible. The world's got plenty of stuff for them out there, but trying to keep the school system, purged of such.
Yeah, maybe I had a protected childhood or something, but growing up in the 70s and 80s, I really don't remember any discussion at all of what gender do you want to be and what sexual orientation you want to have. It was just sort of assumed you're born a boy, you're going to stay a boy, eventually you become a man, and you get married or not.
Absolutely, yeah. This transgender ideology is pure insanity. The most compassionate thing you can do is tell someone the truth. Uh, a woman is never going to have prostate cancer. I mean, there's just simple truths. A man's never going to have a baby, not going to be able to breastfeed. The in a man is just traditionally stronger than a woman. That we are made different. That's one of the bills that we did. Susan DuBose got through. What is a woman bill? It's a shame that you need such a bill, but that was a big success. And we I think we had a very productive legislative session. We got through a couple of really tough bills. The Alpha Healthcare was a bill that we did get through for our farmers, and that was greatly needed. Another one is the PBMs. That was a big fight that we were losing so many of our independent pharmacists. The pharmacies were dropping like flies across the state. But we all have to work together as a team, the House and the Senate, and our rules are different than the Senate. In the House, we can't filibuster like that all day. And I think you're going to see, as a result of this last session, I'm hoping that we're going to see some rule changes upstairs, not to cut off the debate, but to limit it where just one person can't basically take their ball and bat and go home and just shut things down. They almost didn't pass all those local bills. I think they got all those through, and I think we got the blue through.
Didn't they get like 11 of the 47 they had piled up?
Is that all they got? I didn't know that.
Maybe I'm missing it, but moving 11 bills against full frontal filibuster under their rules is pretty difficult. I think they did 11 before they had switched to do back to blue, because back to blue took 2 hours.
Yeah, I didn't realize.
Can you guys hear me now?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we
Can
can
y'all
hear
hear me
you,
better now?
Chris.
Okay, you can't hear me better, or am I
Yes,
still
we can
fading in
hear
and out?
you.
Hey,
See what you can do here.
I can hear you now.
Okay, okay, so I got in a better spot here. Representative Bell, let me ask you this right here about the back blue bill. Me and Brandon was talking about this earlier. Was that really necessary? I mean, did the police not already have that layer of protection?
They do, but ever since George Floyd, we across the state, across the nation, have a really hard time recruiting and retaining law enforcement officers. I mean, every department you talk to, there's had such a reduction in staff, and if you're worried about getting tied up in frivolous lawsuits continually, uh, this just gave a little more support there. Where if you're following your departmental rules and policies to keep you from getting tied up, because there are people literally out there um, that are trying to set you up for cases as such. And so anything we can do, to help some of these areas, we need police greatly. Some areas, there's not a lot of police presence needed, but it's the areas where you need them greatly that we're seeing. I bet the Birmingham, Mobiles, Montgomerys. I know even Gadsden, we've had a drop in police officers, but I do think they needed some support in order uh, to recruit and retain. The proof will be in the pudding in hopefully in a few months that we can see if it did work.
When you was talking about the transgender stuff, I've asked several people this: is this no longer about Democrat versus Republican? Is this about good versus evil?
Absolutely agree with you. And some of this stuff is just nonsense. I mean, absolute nonsense that where they talk about affirming care and they want us to play along and pretend that someone's calling it something that is not. It's just pure insanity. For so many years in the DSMs, it was a mental disorder, and then when Obama came to the scene, they started calling it gender dysphoria and would no longer call it a mental disorder. But it clearly is. If you are a man and you think you're a woman, we've had people dress up and pretend stuff, long as I can remember, but we've never had all of the people demanding that we play along with them. Look at the men and women's sports. And y'all have probably seen the video where there's a man laying on the ground and a woman's got an arm bar hold on him, and the man simply stands up and carries a woman across the room. Men are stronger. And it's just insane that we keep trying to put men in the women's locker room and competing with them in sports. And if you'll notice, we're not having women trying to compete as a man. We are having men that are trying to compete as a woman. Just like the whole drag queen, discussion that we've had. If the drag queens wanted to show up at the senior centers or the nursing homes, they would absolutely love it. But they continue to try to show up at our children's schools and libraries. There again, that's something that some adults have made a decision to try to do, and it is indoctrination, and it is the sexualization of children. Let them go to the senior centers and dress up, because I promise they will love it. They will find it entertaining. But we literally are living life upside down in so many ways, and hopefully a number of us are trying to turn things right side up. If you've noticed, all of a sudden, masculinity is no longer under attack like it was.
Right.
It's not shameful to all of a sudden be a man. And to be an alpha male. Thankfully, do you think this country was founded by beta males? It was founded by alpha males. That you've got to have to go to war. DEI has not made anything better. Do you think your airports are safer today because of DEI? No. There is no governmental agency, nothing you can point to say that got better. You can show the absolute opposite instead of getting people on merit. We want the brightest and the best. We don't care what color you are, don't care what nationality you are. America is a melting pot. But we do need the best and brightest pilots out there. We need the best air traffic controllers. And this insanity where we're trying to just pick a quota, which is probably hard to find anyway. But all of a sudden we're seeing a breath of fresh air in America and seeing some just it's like the adults are in charge all of a sudden back again. And one thing interesting, I've been saying America is poised for revival. We are actually seeing it taking place. Young men are returning to church in droves. And of course, when the men show up at church, the children go. So many times we had noticed it was mom only carrying the kids. So I think this is very exciting times that we are living in right now. We literally are watching history unfold every day.
Me and Christopher made this point before. Our issue with the drag shows in the public schools and the public libraries, we would have the same issue if you sent like strippers in there and had stripper story time with the third year, the third graders, if you're sexualizing the kids.
Excellent point. Something I like to point out to people that it seems like nobody seems to know, but just share with you a few historical facts. Public school began in the church. The first teachers were the pastors. The pastors were the most educated person in the community. The term Sunday school comes from school being taught at church on Sunday. The first textbook was the Holy Bible. The first reader was called the New England Primer. It was used from 1690 to 1930, 240 years. And we know every single founding father learned to read from a New England primer, which is full of scripture. There has been such a war on Christianity and Judeo-Christian values. But I can assure you from the beginning of this nation, from the Mayflower Compact, it says, you couldn't get off the boat till you signed it, which every man did. It said they came in the name of Christ for the discipleship of Christ. That document inspired the Declaration of Independence, which has 4 references to God. It also inspired our Constitution, which is based on biblical principles. And I know people get all torn up when you talk about church, but do you guys know where the largest church in the nation was? By a vote of the Congress? It was our U.S. Capitol. President Thomas Jefferson attended church there, both as vice president and later president. But every president from Jefferson to Lincoln attended church at the U.S. Capitol. And that was by a vote of the Congress. They voted to instill Christian morality in the armed forces, appropriated federal funds for Christian chaplains for our military, as well as our Congress still there today. You literally cannot go to D.C. without seeing the faith of our founding fathers carved in stone. And that is just a historical fact I'm sharing with you. This nation absolutely was founded on Judeo-Christian values, but it was founded on freedom of religion, even freedom from religion. But I just like to get that point in there with you because it seems like nobody knows. One of my favorite things to ask young people is, why is the Liberty Bell named the Liberty Bell? And to date, not one person has gotten it right. But it's because Leviticus 25:10 is engraved in the side of the bell that says, proclaim liberty throughout the world and all the inhabitants thereof. That bell hung at the Pennsylvania State House, which you guys know is Independence Hall. Can you imagine the meltdown today if you said, hey, I'm gonna hang a bell with scripture, at the courthouse or wherever? The Coach Kennedy case, which had profound impacts that people still really haven't understood. I'm sure they wish they had left him alone because the Supreme Court, overturned all that nonsense when he was praying on his own at the 50-yard line. But they overturned the Lemon Test, which makes anything now legal that had a historical precedence. And man, we have got historical precedents all over our nation's founding. You can't walk into the rotunda to the U.S. Capitol without seeing the acknowledgement of God all over that room. Just in the paintings, you walk into the chamber of the house, it says, in God we trust. Moses, the chief lawgiver, has the most prominent spot in the chamber. 10 Commandments is inside and outside the U.S. Supreme Court. Scripture is literally all over, from the Washington Monument to the White House. But it's just part of our nation. It's part of who we are as Americans.
Yeah, the House, I know, passed a bill, I think that Mark Gidley carried, where the 10 Commandments and other historical documents had to be displayed somewhere
100%
in
legal.
schools.
Yes. 100% legal. Yeah, and that was very disappointing. That was another bill that got lost in the logjam upstairs that we hope that next year, hopefully they won't wait till the last minute to deal with some of these bills. But hopefully they will change the rules so that they don't have so much debate. But that was it. And Mark also had another bill dealing with elder abuse that if you were involved in it, you got cut out of the will. You didn't stand to receive anything. A very, you know, common sense bill that at the same time was up there. Several of us are a little, perturbed about, we did our part and we're team players, but we need the Senate to, you know, return the favor that we do as well in the House. Now, granted, it was a Democrat filibuster, but we need the Republicans that are in charge, hopefully, to fix the rules so our bills can get a fair shake.
Tell me again about this bill that you said dealt with people who were sexual predators of children. It did, would you say polygraph?
Yes, it included polygraph through the pardons and parole process. Aaliyah was back in this as our pardons and parole board, and it would allow them and a judge to add that if it was with a child, because as they have terms of the release when they release them, and this would add another tool to the toolbox. And in the other states that have done it, they've shown a dramatic reduction in recidivism, which is you really worry about putting these guys on the street. So that one to me should have been a priority to get through, but we didn't get it through in the Senate. The House passed it with I don't think there was a single no vote on it. It sailed through committee. It sailed through committee upstairs in the Senate. It just never made it to the floor. We had been assured it was going to make it as well. But I guess there's a lot of other priorities that we're competing against. And that, I'm gonna pre-file that bill, here in just a couple of days. And that'll be the third year for that bill as well.
Representative Butler, I'm going way back here, but when I was in school in the 70s and 80s, you couldn't pass a note because you would get caught and you'd get in trouble. So a lot of times, while the teacher's lecturing or whatnot, I'm in my notebook, like drawing little pictures of animals and dogs and spaceships and airplanes and tanks and that kind of cool stuff. And I get in trouble periodically for that. How much more difficult is it for a student today who's able to watch TV or text all their little friends on their phones? And isn't that kind of why y'all passed the Focus Act, yanking the phones out of the schools?
Absolutely. And I spent 10 years on the Etowah County Board of Education. And when we passed it, I was a big proponent because for a long time, I was the only parent of school-age children on our school board. So we saw it as being a positive, and almost instantly we regretted allowing them in the schools back then because the kids could not behave. And it wasn't cheating. It wasn't the texting. What shut down school, just to be honest with you, it was the students sending naked pictures back and forth to each other, and then, sharing it with their friends, and it literally was shutting down the school. Thankfully, in Etowah County, our DA dealt with it because it was children differently than some areas. They made the kids, they charged them with possession of child pornography, distribution of child pornography, when technology just, it's changed so dramatically. But that was the number one. It literally would shut down the school systems. But what is concerning to a number of us, besides all the nonsense and them playing on the phones, watching TV, but if you walk into a school cafeteria or even a restaurant and there's 6 young people sitting at a table, not a one of them are talking to each other and interacting. They're all bent down looking at their phones. And that is extremely concerning. The lack of socialization. None of us can do anything by ourselves. We need to know how to get along. You're right there talking to someone, or you're not talking to the one across from you. You're texting somebody wherever they are. But anyway, there's a lot of repercussions that are coming from these phones, and I love the fact that Lee Holsey brought that bill and that we passed it, and that was a priority for the governor as well, because they're learning, and social media, just the anxiety and mental anguish that's coming from so much of this, the cyberbullying that's taking place. So many laws have had to be changed that are different from when you and I were in school. If you look statistically, the problems in school went from running in the hall, chewing gum, talking in class, to all kinds of, from rape, murder, drugs. It's changed so dramatically. and we're going to have to continue to change with it to make schools a safe haven and an educational environment. The goal is to get the students either college or career ready. And, we like to think we're doing a great job, but the proof's in the pudding, and we're not always doing that. We're, graduating some functionally illiterates. We need to get these kids ready for these high-tech jobs that are out there. And I think putting the phones away in the schools is a huge step to that direction. At minimum, they are just a nuisance and a distraction. They, that when I was in school, we had payphones in the school. We could go call our parents if we needed to, or you go to the office and use the phone. The kids will still be able to have the phones. They just have to be, put away, quite different than the way it is today. And some of our, hearing from the students, some of the teachers might be a problem as well, because, I've had students tell me how the last 15 minutes, the teacher would say, okay, y'all can play on your phones. And of course, the teacher was on their phone as well. And so we've got to lead by example on that. And most of our teachers are amazing and will.
We've seen, like, over the past few years, more money going into the education budget. But I think the last numbers that we're still not improving. Do you have an idea on how we can get better and get our numbers up?
Yeah, that's, so much goes back to the family issues, that, the number one indicator of poverty is a fatherless home. Nobody wants to say that, but that is the gospel. If you do not have a high school diploma, if you have drug use, so many of that. So we've got to focus on those things. We need men to step up and mentor their children, to be involved in their life, even if they're not living, with the mom. We've got to step up, and I'm encouraged that we're seeing a lot of that. But we keep throwing money at the problem instead of actually fixing it. Something I like to point out recently, we had almost 40,000 applicants for the Choose Act. That tells you there is a huge dissatisfaction with what we're doing in public school that used to not be there. And a lot of things were exposed during COVID with it's there, the proof's in the pudding of the sexualization of children and some of this, this woke ideology that's taking place. But I was simply trying to pass a bill that mirrored President Trump's executive order. Did you ever think you would see the federal government be more conservative than the state of Alabama? Well, the truth is today they actually are through President Trump's leadership, but we're going to get them there. But it's just amazing that we've been teaching nonsense in some of these instead of focusing on reading, writing, and arithmetic. Something that, only 23% of the population gets a 4-year degree. For so many years, we have ignored the trade schools. It's what they were called when I was a kid. Now they're called career tech centers. But, we did the dual enrollment for post-secondary education, where a student can literally graduate high school with a associate's degree in plumbing, electrical, carpentry, automotive, and literally can go straight to their career. When Airbus came to Alabama in 2013, they needed 900 welders that we didn't have. And that's when we passed that post-secondary dual enrollment for career tech training. But you talk about fighting and combating generational poverty. If we could get these kids, from poverty to, at that time, it was $50,000 a year pop that those jobs were starting at, but you will change lives of people and hopefully continue it and keep it going. But we need workers. And one thing that we need, when people talk about AP, we need advanced placement plumbers, welders, electricians, all that. With the skills are changing so that these, what were considered just trades jobs, are now so high tech on so many instances. Used to anybody could work on a car back in the day. But nowadays, you about need an electrical engineering degree to work on one. I mean, they're so high tech, and that's just something simple that points out that technology that's needed, that we have got to train people. But one of the things I know when I was on the school board, at that time, our schools were pushing everybody on an academic route, and we're not putting anybody on the career tech route. And we have every day we're seeing the demand for skilled labor. And that's something that we've got to continue to focus on.
I know, growing up, used to you went to construction site and it was a lot of white, black, World War II, Vietnam era, guys that had been around, did around, had pickup trucks just loaded with tools or whatever they needed for anything. And they just dominated construction sites. Now that we're building the new state house, you couldn't do that without like Hispanic labor. It just seems like that whole generation of carpenter, plumber, tractor operator, kind of guys, they retired and we just didn't replace them. Am I wrong?
You're spot on, and you see young people that have bought into the lie. They go get a sociology degree, and they've got a huge mountain of school debt, and they can't be employed, or they're very underemployed. Where you'll see the carpenters, plumbers, electricians that have a boat, they have a place at the beach, and they have no school debt, and they immediately went to work. We've got to encourage that because, like I pointed out, only 23% of the population gets a 4-year degree. So we need to do a better job at encouraging young people in our schools to look at the trades, because there comes a lot from doing a job well and doing it with your hands. I mean, I'm a product of the Career Tech Center. It was called trade school in my day, vocational school, but I literally excelled at it in high school. Got a full scholarship. Now it's Gadsden State. At the time, it was Alabama Technical College. But I literally was a master electrician at 21 years of age, and I quit my job and started business May 10th, 1985. Just a little over a week ago, we celebrated our 40th year in business. And there are so many other Mack Butlers and a lot of people smarter than me that could do the same thing. But I've been blessed that all my adult life, I've been self-employed.
Representative Butler, stayed on the same lines about talking about jobs. I mean, we've seen like throughout my life, industry after industry closed in Birmingham and, like Goodyear up there in Gadsden. We've seen the president try to bring companies back. Is there anything the state of Alabama can do to try to lure companies like that, where maybe if you didn't have a degree in a tech field, that you could go to work in one of those steel companies or whatever and make a decent wage?
Absolutely, and we can, as government, create an environment that's conducive for such. That one of the things we can do locally is be preparing the workforce. We've got a brand new workforce development center here in Gadsden that is state of the art. That partnered with the industry to see what they need, but providing having the workforce ready will definitely help recruit them. It's something we've got in Etowah County. We've got a mega site prepared, about 1,100 acres. We've got a lot of the SEED Act money that's been pumped into there. We're getting all the infrastructure in place. Rainbow City recently has run the water out there. We believe we're going to see something like a Toyota come here, but you've got to have the employees, and we believe we're going to be ready. We're working on that for such. But absolutely, you can create the environment, you can create incentives, you can do a lot of things to help lure them. And that's, sadly, you've got to about bribe them with incentives. But they do need, they need the arts and they need safety. You don't want a crime-ridden community, but you've got to have the workforce there. And we will be able to recruit some workforce. I know something we're doing in Rainbow City is we're looking at making more apartments for housing for young people to come. That you've got to have that workforce available. If you just look to the north of us, what Huntsville's doing, we need to mirror a lot of that. And of course, they do have the Redstone Arsenal up there, but Chattanooga is a good example that's very similar to Gadsden. They got that beautiful river running through the middle. They reinvented themselves. But we are seeing economic recovery in Alabama. We're kind of becoming the Detroit of the South. Car manufacturing here, that we're encouraged with just daily the things we're doing and that the state is offering, and will continue to respond to the corporate world as they're reaching out to us. A lot of the stuff that, the Commerce Department's talking to, a lot of that's top secret. They can't share with a lot of us, a lot of, possible recruitment that's going on, but we can definitely jump in there and draft some legislation to make it more conducive for them to come.
One of the things that got done that probably doesn't get talked about enough in this legislative session is you chopped another 33% off the gas tax, not the gas, the grocery tax.
Grocery tax, yes, that was huge. Yes, yes. We would love to see that get eliminated, but we're now down to half that. The state, and we also made it where the cities can go along as well, because that's one thing we all have to eat. So it would be nice if we could completely remove that tax off. So that's one of the highlights of the session that we did get through. That there's not a single one of us that does not affect.
Because that hits people on the lowest echelon probably the hardest, because so much, the greater percent of their income goes out in groceries. But even as you climb on up, in the upper brackets, you still buy food. And, you go to the grocery store and, it's $1 for this can of beans. And then the state was slapping 4% on there, and the county's another 2%. And a lot of times the city 4 and 5%. People were paying 10, 15%, 10% of their grocery budget was taxes to various government in the state of Alabama.
And I would love to see that totally get eliminated. As we grow the economy, I think that's something each year we can look at. One kind of surprise is all the revenue we got that we weren't really expecting off the the interest on our state deposits. They put a lot of extra money in the general fund this year, but I do think we're going to continue to see prosperity for some time. The Trump administration is doing some tough things right now that are going to benefit us for decades. I believe.
Representative Butler, what do you think about the Veterans Bill? Was that really something big, or was that just a bunch of fluff?
Oh, that was a priority for our governor. So I kind of set out on that one to let the veterans decide. We had a number of veterans in the House that were all on that committee, and waited to see what they were going to bring to us. And that's what I asked them. And then all the groups that were opposed to it seemed to have gotten good with it. But that was a priority for the governor, and when they brought it to the floor, I was able to vote for it because all of our veterans voted for it. I only heard from 2 people about it in my district, one of which changed his mind after they changed the bill, with all the amendments that came to it.
Yeah, that bill changed a lot as it went through the legislature.
Right, and that's the way legislation happens. Many times we drop a bill, and that kind of brings everybody to the table. So it wasn't my bill. All I had was a vote, and I did vote for it because the veterans in the House, I don't know any veterans that were opposed to it. I sat right next to a veteran, and I made sure he was good with it in order to vote for it, because we all owe those guys a huge debt of gratitude. It just infuriates me when I would see things we were doing for illegals while we've got we've got veterans sleeping under a bridge. Those guys we need to take care of before we take care of anybody else, is we owe a debt of gratitude to them that we can never pay. So I do think at the end of the day, it wound up being okay, everybody, but did we need it? I don't know. I wasn't on that committee, but I did vote for it when the time came to vote.
So I served in Afghanistan, and I'm still trying to figure out, how this is going to affect me, or if it's going to affect me at all. I don't really see how it's going to change my day-to-day life.
It seemed like the average veteran didn't really care, and it did seem like a little personality conflict that got going, but I knew it was a priority of the governor, and we need to work well with the governor and the committee that vetted it. Of course, it modified greatly as everybody came to the table, but it did seem like all the groups got good with it. I talked to one gentleman that came to the legislature that was not good with it. But all the other groups, stood before us and were endorsing it. Some even came, had lunch with us there at the State House. A number of the groups did that were originally opposed to it. And I think they gave each one of them a voice and kind of, worked and, but that literally is the legislative process, and that's the way it should work, is let everybody come to the table and the art of compromise. End of the day, the governor did get what she wanted. And
Representative Butler, of course, I covered the legislature when they were just struggling to figure out how to pay all the bills in the general fund. And even go back to when we were prorating the education trust fund. I think the current budget y'all passed for 2026 in education was $9.9 billion. And I think there's like $2 billion in supplemental funding in there. And then we had a $3.7 billion general fund budget. Is there concern that in the next economic shutdown, which hopefully is not coming anytime soon, that, as we've grown the size of government, it's going to be harder if we end up, in an extended recession in having to downsize?
Well, absolutely, that's always a concern. And as a former school board member, I literally served on the board when we dealt with proration, and it's a nightmare when they declare proration. It doesn't start that day; it goes back to the beginning of your budget year. So it really inflicts pain. We couldn't prorate energy costs, couldn't prorate salaries. So I know firsthand how it is. But yes, if that were to happen, you have to look at reduction in force and a lot of things that would take place. And we're able to put some horns and whistles in our schools that we haven't had. If you look at our schools of the 70s, the entire budget for the state was about 500 million. And so you look now that we're at 12 point something billion. We have come a long way. If you took that original budget and equated for inflation, you would be nowhere near where we are now. You'd be, 1 point something billion. And some would argue that schools in the 70s were so much better. The schools in the 70s didn't have to deal with a lot of things the schools are dealing with now. The number one request we get for is funding for mental health. And that's from a number of things, from the dissolution of the family, but also these children that went through COVID are scarred, some of them pretty deep. And that was almost like an intentional scar that didn't have to take place. We're telling children that they're going to kill grandma. We shut down their school, and there was never any need for such. We shut down churches. It seems like we shut down everybody that didn't have a lobbyist that wanted to be open. The mom and pops, liquor stores stayed open. Even in conservative Alabama, abortion clinics were open at that time. Walmart, Home Depot were open. But, there were mom and pop businesses that were shuttered that'll never return. There were churches shuttered, never returned, which I would remind you, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, meaning you cannot close down a church. The only way you could literally do it is to close everything across the board. But as you saw, they were very selective of what they did. But I think we have impacted our children with what was done during COVID. It's going to affect them for some time. But that is one of the, when you were in school, there was not a mental health need, but now it is a very real need. We have to have nurses in the schools now because so many children require insulin injections. If I learned on school board, if we had an invasive procedure, we had to have a nurse. But we have got, childhood obesity, chronic disease, childhood diabetes. And this, if you look back from our ultra processed foods, our sweetened drinks, one thing I'm encouraged by is what RFK is doing and talking about. We have all these petroleum-based dyes that we were giving children. So many of our foods in America are banned in other countries. And it just shows that we have been controlled by lobbyists and profits. Hopefully, some of that's going to be reined in because our most precious resource is our children. And that one thing I'm concerned about is the lack of people having babies. We need more people having babies.
Representative Butler, we talked about some of the bills. Do you think there was any bill that didn't get out of committee that was the most important besides the ones that we talked about, the drag queen and bill, and what was the other one about? How about the child predators? Was there any other ones that was really
Well,
important?
one of the ones that was shocked to me, and you never know the process, and this one's been in the news lately, but and it actually, when the Senate version came to state government, which I'm on, and I made the motion for it, but the release time bill, which has been around for decades and constitutional, it doesn't logistically work everywhere. But I know at one of our campuses here in Etowah County, there is a school literally across the street, and it's an elective. It's not mandated, but students that want to have some religious instruction literally walk across the school. But you could literally have a van, no taxpayer dollars are expended on that. But that's a perfect example showing you lobbyists. When you talk to parents, parents are great with having electives. That's something they would elect to do. No one was offended by that, but boy, the Superintendent Association killed that one pretty soundly twice in committee, and that's just showing, the power of lobbyists, and that's taxpayer funded lobbyists. On that, we are supposed to be down there advocating for the people in our district, but so many times it seems like their voices get muted from some of these lobbyists are very good at what they do. And that to me is just a perfect example that where we've got to do a little better job. I just think Sam Adams and John Hancock would have a fit if they saw that one right there that didn't make it through. When you look at lovers of liberty and look into the founding of America and the education, to be, that apparently we were so offended. They were telling us how, they didn't have time for such. You talk to any student and ask them what they've been doing for the last couple of weeks of school. They've been watching movies, is what many of them will tell you. Because I love to ask students questions, what's going on in schools. People keep telling me about things that aren't happening in our schools with gender ideology, sexual orientation. Talk to some of these students, and you'll find out something a little different. I had a student recently report to me that her teacher at high school couldn't teach his class for focusing on all things transgender. And it's just nonsense that the parents don't want. Let them deal with that at home if that's what they want. But let our schools actually be, an environment to learn reading and writing and arithmetic. Let's get that right before we venture off in some of these other things.
I know my mother's, she spent an entire career in the public school system teaching special ed. And any day where they had an early dismissal, or they had a program or a pep rally or anything where they went to shorten schedule on the classes. So, where normally it's a 45-minute, then everybody, shifts. All of her special ed classes were by rule from, the principal's office shut down that day because of the special schedule, because since it was short in periods, we're not sending the children into special ed. And she would get mad as I'll get out, because it's like, yeah, you just took another day of instruction from the children because of, other stuff that you're doing. How much time is wasted in a typical school day on stuff that's not straight, honest?
There is a lot. There is a lot, and our poor teachers are collecting money and having to do so many things other that compromise their instructional time. Because your good teachers get upset with some of the things they are asked to do that take away from it. But you are 100% right. We could do a better job, and the proof's just not in the pudding right now with our graduates. We're not. The proficiency is just not there at our schools where it should be. If you look at some of these numbers, it's kind of terrifying when you look at the proficiency in math and reading and comprehension. that we could definitely do a better job. And and our teachers can't choose their students; they've got to deal with whatever. And so many times they can't teach to the high or the low; they have to teach in the middle to kind of get them all. And but we're asking them to do more and more and more continually, and they're dealing with so many other components. Now special education, you may be dealing with children that are emotionally conflicted. There's so many different things that are coming into fray, and I just don't think it's a good idea to be going up and telling people, well, Brandon, you might be a woman. Have you thought about that? Let's just start calling you Brandy from now on. I mean, it's just some of this stuff is just insane. And if you listen to some of these guys that have detransitioned, and it's just heart wrenching some of the things that have been done to these kids.
Do you have any idea how we ever got to this? Where they've just started trying to indoctrinate these children. I mean, it's like I woke up one day and the whole world changed.
It's like overnight. Literally, we went from and it happened during President Obama was when they started putting the women in the men's restrooms, or excuse me, the men in the women's restroom. You don't see the women wanting to go to the men's; it's the men wanting to go to the women's. And we're seeing so many problems from that. The dressing rooms, the sports, that it's pure insanity. And you'll see some areas passing legislation with pronouns where someone calls somebody the wrong pronoun, you're in serious trouble. It's just literally nonsense. But you have so many places, and the whole DEI mess. If you go, heaven forbid, you have to have surgery. I want you to have the best surgeon there is out there, and the best doctor, not the one that got there just because they fit some profile and some quota. You want somebody that literally got there off merit. It'd be fine with me if you take their name and their race and everything off the resume, but look at the real proof in the pudding, because we need the best and the brightest, and then let them mentor the ones that aren't as sharp. And it shouldn't be that shouldn't be that big of a conflict.
I was listening to Charlie Kirk the other day, and I love that guy. And he was talking to one
He
of these
is
kids.
amazing.
Yes, there's nobody that can beat him in anything. And somebody said something about DEI helping black people, whatever. And Charlie Kirk said, if Dr. King was alive, he would be against DEI because he said he wanted people to be judged on the content of their character, not the color of their skin.
Yes. Such a good point. Yes. Yeah. If somebody goes up against Charlie Kirk, they better pack a lunch and carry.
Oh yeah, I don't know what that guy. Any subject or whatever, but he's gonna. I've never seen anybody beat the guy. I mean, he is phenomenal.
He is transforming college campuses. He has brought young people to the table to vote. I think he is, is a huge factor in President Trump's, election and winning the popular vote as well, because he is really putting it out there where they can see it. You can't argue with him. Man, this guy knows his stuff backwards and forward.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I was seeing some numbers, and President Trump won the youth male vote, 18 to 34-year-olds, which I was kind of shocked because I thought they were just.
That's normally the liberal, yeah. And Charlie Kirk is mentoring and making conservatives out of so many people. What do they say? If you're not a liberal by 20, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative by 40, you have no brain. He's helping these guys get a brain early on.
Well,
yeah, that's a great quote there.
That's all I really have. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. It's great to be with you today.
Thank you, Representative Butler.
Hey, thank you so much. Talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
See you, man. Bye-bye.
Stop it. All right.
Yeah,
It was pretty cool.